I think that the Oddworld games are getting too funny. I know the series has always been playful and tongue-in-cheek at times, so I want to clarify that what I really mean is that they're getting self-destructively funny. When I talk about each instalment, I'm not talking about the mechanics of the games or criticising the quality of the game from a gameplay point, or even how fun they are. I'm simply looking at the narrative and characterisation techniques that each recent game has used and critiquing how I think the Oddworld Inhabitants' attempt to introduce more humour into the series is at the detriment of the series' quality and message. Abe's Oddysee wasn't exactly the most straight-faced game that's ever been produced. The fact that the game includes farts at all is a testament to that. Abe, our hero, is also similarly clumsy and most of the time gets away by sheer luck. But these attributes of Abe are less played out for actual laughs to the audience and instead used as a tool to characterise Abe as an unlikely hero. The rest of the world, from the music to the art style, instead present us with a hostile and very serious world in comparison. Everything, from the aesthetics and the gameplay, seeks to push a sense of isolation and powerlessness. Abe is truly alone in this world. The soundtrack is comprised of ambient background music that goes to ethereal sounds interspersed with the alien cries of whatever terrifying creature lurks just out of sight. The noises of the enemies on the next screen come at you to fill the player with dread about what lies beyond their view. Even the screen-by-screen system of Oddysee furthers this feeling of isolation, albeit coincidentally. When it's not quiet, the game quickly shifts to frenetic percussion that seeks to heighten the panic whenever Abe is spotted by an enemy and forced to run for his life. Every aesthetic and narrative choice of Abe's Oddysee wants us to feel isolated, and so forces us to push on. It attempts to make Oddworld seem truly strange, a ridiculous fantasy alien world, that because it's played for realism, it becomes a nightmare. The only times that it uses humour is to simply make us like Abe more, to empathise with his quest, and also wish for success. When you do get to interact with other characters, other than having your throat ripped out, your conversations with the Mudokons you save are brief and are all purely functional to the gameplay. There's no chit-chat with any of the other Mudokons. But this is fitting given the surroundings. It makes everything seem hurried when perched out of sight of the danger and scouting the screen for the best way to lure a slig away from a working Mudokon. The player is able to watch the silent Mudokon going about their business, stopping their work only to be beaten by sligs, who laugh, swear, and then go about their patrol. Even having dispatched the nearby danger by hypnotising and exploding the slig, the Mudokon slaves don't react to this apparent safety at all, instead continuing their work. It creates a sense that Rupture Farms is a dangerous place, where one false move or overheard word will have you beaten to death. It goes a long way to creating an atmosphere, something that the later games have managed to lose. The series itself is a critique and satire of industry and its impact upon the environment, an idea that Lorne Lanning, the series creator, is very fervently pushed in interviews. And the tone of the game seeks to only emphasise this. Everything is horrendous and ugly, from the world to the people that inhabit it. Any sense of beauty or peace is gone. Every sort of aesthetic choice in this game is thematic to that overall message. The only environment in the game that is the most quiet is in Monsaic Lion's area. That's the temple for the Mudokons. Abe has been prophesized as the saviour of his race, and yet when we enter this holy place, the last remaining area of free Mudokons, we find almost no Mudokons at all. No one interacts with you other than hostility. The few Mudokons that do inhabit the area do so in isolation, never breaking from their meditation, and any that you meet are suspicious of you and will kill you if you even make one false move. In fact, most of the Mudokons are far off in the background, separate from Abe. Even a holy place for a gentle tribal species has been corrupted by the greed of those who seek only profit and power. You truly see the impact that the Gluckin's enslavement of the Mudokon race through the Mughal Cartel has had on this civilization. Abe's Oddysee is a harsh critique of industrialism, and the game is ugly because of it. There's no celebration throughout Oddysee, and aside from a slightly chirpy cutscene at the end, the game's credits quickly take over to retain the atmosphere back to this low-key affair. You won the game, but all you get is ambient sounds and guttural animal sounds to think over what you've just experienced. It was with the follow-up game, Abe's Exodus, that the comedy began to slip in. One of the main reasons for this seems to be that Abe now interacts with other Mudokons more, since he starts the game as a freed slave who is now the saviour of an entire race. Given this fact, it makes sense that with Abe now having to interact with other Mudokons and other characters, and given that his character has been established to be a bit of a schmuck, that some extra humour would arise from this. All the jokes come naturally from this setup. Abe is given a mission by some spirits while he's unconscious that he must now head to Necromines in order to stop his people's bones from being used in Soulstorm Brew, another company owned by the Gluckins. When Abe sets out on a journey to track down these mines with a group of followers who are eager to help, given his incompetency, he manages to get them lost. The Mudokons quickly turn on him, but luckily before it escalates they manage to find their way into the mines. Throughout the game, several times the Mudokons will turn on Abe, and every instance of this is played for laughs, but it all makes sense given the context because the Mudokons all think Abe is an idiot as well. He may be a prophet, but yesterday he was just another employee that they worked with, and so it makes sense they wouldn't immediately trust him or take him seriously. It's really the overall increase in cutscenes, and therefore the presence of other characters to fill these cutscenes, that further adds these increased moments of comedy in the game. Aside from the Mudokons, there's a lot more time spent with the antagonists of the game, namely the Gluckins and Sligs. The creators are trying to expand further on the criticism of corporatism within this game, and so most if not all of the antagonist characters involved are sleazy and unlikable. Since these cutscenes are all so short, the writers have gone for a comical and satirical tone, since they have limited time within which to characterise someone, it makes sense to have their personality more immediately present within the scene. It wouldn't really make any sense to have any sort of grey area character, since within about 30 seconds it wouldn't really leave a lot of room to sort of expand on the issue. This means that all the Gluckins in the game come across as callous, greedy and stupid, although different tropes of it. Any Sligs that appear are seen as opportunistic sellouts who will do any job for the Gluckins as long as it brings them benefits. Because of this, all of the Sligs are rude and sadistic, laughing as they imprison and beat the slaves, as seen in the first game. In the cutscenes, they are often even dismissive of the Gluckins, as if their entire nature is to be defaultly hostile, before realising immediately the mistake they've made.
Yeah, what do you want? Hey! Vice President Hausling. Yes, sir.
Disarm the main gate!
Gotcha, sir. Gotcha.
Do it!
Yes, sir. Man, he is pissed.
It's all more insight into the personalities of the antagonists, and although it's played as pretty simple satire, it brings across their personalities well, and fills in the gaps of lore that I imagine the budgetary constraints of the first game didn't allow. There are several comical news reports that also turn up, which are mainly used as a storytelling device to show the player how Abe's actions are bringing down the morale and composure of the Gluckins. The only character who stands out the most is the Brewmaster. He's the owner of Soulstorm Brew, and he speaks in a heavy French accent, screaming about how they must achieve the perfect flavour of brew. Of all the characters that appear in the game, he's certainly the one who's most played for laughs, and it's one of the first instances where the game sort of breaks the fourth wall. Of course, making a reference to a French chef in a world where French chefs probably don't exist, since it's another planet millions of miles away.
It's not fair! We had twice the flavor!
For the majority of the actual playtime, the atmosphere remains the same as it did in the first one. Whilst the characters have to have character through their dialogue in a short space of time, the environment never has to change its personality, because it's immediately obvious. Oddworld is a nightmarish place. It is its own character in that way. It isn't funny at all. It doesn't have to characterise itself through having a personality. It simply has to be unpleasant and hostile. The ambient music returns, as do the desolate mines and generally corrupted natural environments of the first game. There are more cutscenes this time to break up the atmosphere with humour, but there's enough game time to bring you back into this isolated atmosphere that the rest of the game hopes to create, if at the cost of disrupting it in the first place. The writers clearly want to make Oddworld a funnier place, and in the end I think it comes at the expense of having an inconsistent tone. The sheer length of the game manages to hide this well for the most part, as by the time you played a puzzle or two you've probably forgotten that your experience was much different a short while ago while a funny cutscene was happening. But because of this desire to have the game be funny in the first place, it means that when the game attempts to do anything emotive, it now steps on its own toes. The final cutscene of Abe's Exodus is a good example of this. To give some context about what the final cutscene is trying to achieve means we have to give some background as to what the series creator Lorne Lanning is trying to do with this game. The Oddworld series was designed as a quintology. 5 major releases were to happen, with each release also being followed by a bonus game. Exodus is a bonus game to Odyssey, which means in total this would be a 10-game series. This series is supposed to be the epic tale of how the beaten down underclass of Oddworld manage against all odds to fight corporations and monopolies of their Gluckin overlords. The series is Lorne Lanning's epic allegory to our own world, and has tried and succeeded in many ways to confront issues of corporatism and environmentalism, although a bit heavy-handedly. Abe's Odyssey's ending is very straightforward, with Abe simply being welcomed as a hero before farting to close out the game. It's this way, I imagine, because Lanning wasn't sure if he'd be able to bring the series to fruition if the game didn't sell well. He ended the first installment as its own separate work, to be reopened if sales were good enough to get a sequel. Given that this happened, the ending cutscene of Exodus is far more open-ended in its scope, promising the continuing adventures and freedom fighting of the inhabitants of Oddworld. I'll let you watch the cutscene just to get a sense of what I'm talking about, and how I think Lorne steps on his own toes during it.
It's not fair! We had twice! They fled out!
I got out of there just in time. And I got the usual reception. The Mudokons were slowly coming together. And they were using their skills to build something new.
It'll be fine. It'll all work out. See, it's all feeling better. Hello, my name is Elf.
Hi, Elf.
I had my first brew when I was with Abe in the desert. Wow.
They were taking things one step at a time.
Can I share now? No. Just shut up.
All was going well. But we knew there had to be more of us out there.
We're screwed.
And we were gonna find them.
Firstly, I think it's important to note how many times the tone very quickly changes in that final cutscene. It starts as comical, with the brewmaster appearing before the explosion of Soulstone Brew. Then we see the Mudokons rebuilding their civilization, and are shown the skit of Alf's rehab and tea. Then suddenly the music and tone become very serious, as Abe talks of all the slaves who are still out there, angrily claiming that they're going to find them all. Then the music builds, as all the Mudokons gather together, facing a moon that bears their hand, a sign from a higher power of their spiritual calling to fight back against the evil that has corrupted their world. Then the shot pulls out to reveal the three Mudokon spirits, who just can't help but turn to the camera and shrug. Lanning just can't help himself in this game. He can't help but throw in jokes, and the odd thing is they're not even that funny. They're very obvious gags that do nothing but sabotage the tone and make the audience aware that they're watching a fictional world. If you're trying to sell me the promise of an epic tale that I will have to spend hundreds of pounds on and become emotionally invested in, then the last thing you should do immediately after that is have your characters look into the camera and shatter my illusions that this is real. If I can't buy into the world or care about it, then how am I supposed to be invested? Can anyone honestly say that this improved the ending for them in the slightest? What does the shrug add, other than to further push this desire of Lanning's for the series to be a comedy? I'm not saying all comedy is bad. The Mudokons arguing who will tell their story first is funny because they come from a situation where they're probably all very emotionally scarred and so will be bitter to each other. They also have a lot of stories to go around, so everyone will be eager to get out. It's showing the struggles for this society to rebuild in a comedic and light-hearted way. Also, it's been established that the character who gets angry was an angry Mudokon anyway, so it's just part of his character. These jokes are fine because they come naturally from the situation. They're comical, but I can accept these jokes as a product of the world in which the characters live, and it's fine for those bits of comedy to pop in, but these out-of-place, try-hard jokes do nothing but shatter the illusion and make the game incapable of sustaining a consistent tone, something that the first game pulled off so masterfully. It was a few years later that Munch's Odyssey would come out, but when it did, the series had become even more of a cartoon. The game begins with our hero Munch talking about how his entire race has been killed off, and he's the only one left. Then he's trapped in an animal trap that allows Viker's lab, our new primary antagonists of the game, and we are treated to a hectic scene as all the wildlife of Oddworld flees the approaching floating lab. Later we meet the Vikers, and they're the usual Oddworld antagonist affair. They're whiny and bitchy, selfish creatures. Because the game has to quickly satirise them in order to characterise them, then these moments make sense and the scene goes a long way in making us hate the Vikers. Also, because it's the start of the game, the tone hasn't really been established yet, so it's fine for them to be funny because the game could be anything at this point.
Now look, that one tested just fine on the fuzzles. It burned holes in our customers' heads! No progress without risks. Risks? Risks?
They also differ enough to the Gluckins and their personalities to not make them feel like we're treading the same ground. From here, however, the game changes from one tone to the other drastically. My issue isn't that there are just jokes, but that there are inconsistent placement of jokes within very serious subject matter. You can hear it immediately within the soundtrack. Gone is the ambience of the first game, replaced now with pumping synth that creates a more action-oriented tone. The gameplay involves a lot more combat, directing AI combatants to fight your way through levels, and so it makes sense that the isolated atmosphere of the first game should go in the wake of the shift of gameplay. The problem follows with this fact, that yet again, there are now a lot of characters at play, and so they must interact. Unfortunately, Lanning and team can't think of a better way for them to interact other than being funny, but the gags are so unnatural to each scene that they just seem like Lanning is trying too hard. There are good jokes here. I'm not trying to push the idea that there can't be jokes, but looking at where the series was a mere 2 games ago, it's almost unrecognisable. And these aren't jokes that come from the situation. They involve kooky music cues and looking at the camera, characters acting retarded for no reason other than it's funny.
Yeah, great. Let's go, guys. We're out of here.
Oh, I can never get what I need. This is too much stress and pressure. That's the big message?
There's a moment when Abe and Munch are in a wood and some Madokins come and find them. They've been given a task by their spiritual guide, the almighty Raisin, because the game is funny now and so all the names have to be funny as well. The task is to return Munch and Abe safely to the almighty Raisin's cave. They briefly discuss if they should return them and then just run away because they can't be bothered. I mean, this is the equivalent of 5 Judases running away from Jesus. Abe has very clearly in the early games been established as the prophet of their people who will lead them to safety, and these guys just run away. They shoot off and we all laugh because they did something that was funny, because Lanning can't approach any scene now without it being funny. And this trend continues throughout. It's cartoony and zany and pushes the series in a direction that is unnatural for it to go given the preceding games. The series up until the point has never been self-referential, and it always seemed like Lanning wanted to create a world that is truly alien and its own. Many people will argue that the series has always been light-hearted, and for the most part I would agree. This isn't 1984's levels of depression, and there's always been humorous parts, like I said before. But in Munch's Odyssey, the characters look at the camera several times while comical music plays in the background. This isn't world building, this doesn't add anything to the situation constructively. All it does is just shatters the suspension of disbelief in the player, and I find it hard to imagine that anyone who enjoyed the tone of the first game finds this as a fitting sequel in any way. I think it'd be hard to argue that the series hasn't lost its way at some point, and I think this is all a symptom of Lanning being a better visual storyteller than he is a writer. The bonus game to Munch's Odyssey, called Stranger's Wrath, goes away to improving this tonal consistency, namely by shaping the story around a tragic character who seems to have more motivation in each cutscene than to just make the audience laugh. He's a very similar character to Munch in that he's one of those characters that's lost his entire species and is alone in the world. But he's not played as some sort of humorous, sort of kooky character. He actually seems to have had that event affect him as a person. He's isolated, even from the audience. We don't know anything about him for the first half of the game. He doesn't trust people. And this is much more engaging than just looking at the camera. This is a character that we can follow and become emotionally invested in. Even Secto, the antagonist of the game, seems like a much more threatening antagonist than we've had in the last couple of games. I mean, Mullet the Gluckin was characterised as a very threatening character, but ever since then, I mean, after the Brewmaster with his funny French accent, and the Vikers who just bitch and moan at each other, and it doesn't really seem like the game is solely relying on cheap satire to get its point across. The hero has depth, and the antagonist seems actually threatening, and has motivations other than just being funny. The secondary antagonists are comical, but it's not the zaniness that was frequent throughout Munch's Odyssey. I mean, they don't look at the camera and they don't break the fourth wall. They all just seem to be stupid assholes, which is understandable for their situation. The humour arises from the characters, not the fourth wall breaking. The sligs in the first and second game felt this way also, as if their humour was a product of their situation and so affected their character to be this way. We laugh at how the sligs are jerks, but because it feels natural. Every character in Munch's Odyssey is so over the top and so obviously out to make the audience laugh that nothing they do feels natural, it just comes across as zany. I do have some problems on a more personal level. I understand the games are Western, but I feel that they may have forced the idea slightly too much. It broke the illusion for me that Oddworld was a real place. The fact that most of the population in this area of Oddworld are yokels and redneck chickens made me stop believing this was a real place. Up until now, the series has been doing a good job of suspending my disbelief, mostly through very imaginative character designs. I mean, all the characters and creatures are based on real-world creatures. I mean, obviously the paramites are based on spiders and such things like that, but it's twisted in a way that makes you feel that it's not from Earth, but these characters are just chickens in dungarees. I mean, it was the inclusion of these characters that broke that disbelief somewhat. It had too many references to the real world that I couldn't help but see as the fictional one that it was. The world suddenly becomes dependent on our own culture to make its content work. And obviously any work of fiction that wants to have an understandable story will have to have some bearing to our own culture and values. I mean, if it got too abstract and Oddworld was too alien, then we wouldn't be able to engage with it, which, since there's an underlying message, would render it mostly useless in its goal. But there's no editing here between the westerns that influence it and the game itself. But these are just chickens. They talk in funny southern accents, there's bounties and ponchos, and the inhabitants say y'all. This is all just quite lazy in relation to what Oddworld inhabitants have done before, and goes from feeling like its own place to just being a slim parody full of references and homages for the audience to enjoy. The things that they do bring across from our world are things they've been bringing across since the first game. You know, the ideas of greed and struggle and oppression are universal enough that we could imagine those things taking place somewhere else. We understand those. Those are the things to bring across. All the aesthetics, however, is too much cultural copy and pasting. The natives and tribal characters of this game are the grubs, which are the weakest part of the game for me. Although I understand that they're supposed to be helpless and slightly stupid, yet again, the zaniness of them made me care very little for them. I didn't particularly care about being the saviour of these people, and instead found them incredibly annoying.
Steve, you escaped! You escaped! Yeah!
Escape? Huh? It was yous that shot me down and helped me out?
That's right. It was us, dude. 'Cause we need your help to fight that secto demon. His security forces have destroyed our lands, and they've stolen our waters, and he's paying them woollarks to, like shoot at us anytime we, go near where we used to live. That ain't right! And now he wants to kill us all! And them woollarks, they're really dangerous, dude. Here, take this. It is armor worn only by your elders. And they disappeared when that secto ass came along. And wear it proudly for them, for their memory. And they'd be proud if you just beat his ass.
I was scraping by without the water here. No fish, they're gone. Fruit, what happened to the fruit? We used to have good fruit. Soon we'll be like dead fruit too. Big Steve! Hey! Yeah, you got an ammo breeding bag now. That's way cool, because if you get up there and you find woolbarks, you bounty them up now, it turns them into live ammo food, and then they'll breed faster for you, man. More ammo! Way to go.
I couldn't accept that they were a culture, and didn't believe them as I did with the Madokan tribes. Having seen the proverb at the start of the game, I also couldn't accept that these irritating things had written this. But at least the series seemed to be going in the right direction. It was trying less hard to be zany and entertaining, and Lanning was apparently using the format of characters and characterization and story to become more comfortable to make it its own internal world that didn't have an audience watching it begging to be entertained all the time. After all, the guy has 6 games left to make, and you can't just retread back jokes for that many installments. There has to be more depth to the world than simply just cheap gags to carry an epic narrative. With the limited resource of the first game, they managed to craft what at least felt like a deep game, layered with atmosphere and one that told us a satisfying story with its limited tools. The story can clearly exist without all the extra cartoony baggage that's been layered onto it in recent installments, and with Stranger's Wrath, it looked like this was going to be the case. So now, almost 9 years later, after Oddworld Inhabitants had shut down and reformed with the help of a small English studio known as Just Add Water, the first original title to be made is a remake of Abe's Oddysee. I was worried about the game at first. It was definitely the art style change that rang alarm bells first. It seemed so shiny and bloom-ridden that it took away a lot from the dirty look of the original. It seemed as if the game was becoming the cartoon that the recent installments had begun to spin it into, but I gave them the benefit of the doubt and hoped that as long as they retained the atmosphere of the original, then it would retain those strengths at least. However, upon release, it also appeared that a lot more changes than a simple art style had occurred to make the game more light-hearted. Oddworld Inhabitants now retrospectively had made the game a lot funnier because apparently they were too tight on budget the first go around to put in all their hilarious jokes. The art style is the least distracting part of the game's atmosphere. Now frequently Mudokon slaves say snappy one-liners throughout the playtime, regardless of whether or not these lines may be funny in their own right. They do take a lot away from the atmosphere of the game. The first problem is that there are only a finite number of jokes that they can come up with, and even with the number that there are in the game, they manage to repeat themselves frequently throughout even the short playtime.
Maybe one day people will follow me around. Is there anything else I can do here? I just seem to be scrubbing. Hand at that window again. I'm doing all this work and I haven't even been paid yet. Maybe one day people will follow me around. Work, all day. Climbing that editorial ladder.
I mean, on the surface, there's nothing wrong with giving the characters a bit more personality, but since most of these lines are played out as gags, it becomes very distracting. As I said before, Rutgers Arms in the original Oddysee was an imposing place that felt menacing and slaves within it downtrodden, but now the game wants to also be funny, and unfortunately you just can't have both in this situation. Rupture Farm's atmosphere relies very heavily on the treatment of its slaves, and it ends up becoming completely stripped of what the original nailed so well the first time. The fact that these lines are also self-referential a lot of the time, poking fun at the slave situation, such as how they don't move around a lot while working, then this goes further to remove you from the world and see it as the work of fiction it is. It's equivalent of looking at the camera and it destroys the atmosphere every time. If anyone wants to argue that the creators are doing this for fun and are trying to keep the game light-hearted, that's a valid point, and although I disagree with the creative choices, I can see why they might want to do that, but I'm not sure I buy it. Given that when you're away from the Mudokons and Rupture Farms and just alone in the temple areas of the games, the game resorts back to its isolated tone again. Surely they still want this seriousness and tension, and desire to keep this in the game. Also, anyone that puts this as their credit music doesn't seem to be taking the game lightly at all. Unless the end credits music is a big joke, which in some ways I hope that this is, as I worry that this being added to the game without a shred of irony is quite perplexing. But those are my thoughts on the Oddworld series and its use of humour. No matter how I may feel about the mechanics or ideas of the games, both artistically and politically, that run throughout the franchise, I can't help but get over just how cartoonish the newer installments are. And I worry that retroactively going back and making the old ones funny and sort of removing some of the tension and seriousness that made them so ingrained in the culture in the first place, I don't think that that's good for the series. The fact that they're now remaking the originals, I only imagine just how much more improved the upcoming Exodus remake will be once it's got more hilarious jokes in it. And I think that's a shame, because I think it's got the best balance of humour whilst retaining the atmosphere in the original, and I would hate to see that destroyed. I can only imagine that the hands of Just Add Water, that this will get more present in future games. I mean, I look forward to seeing what new gameplay types they come up with, but at this point any illusion I had of Oddworld being a real place has been shattered, and it's just for the game of cheap gags, and I for one think that's a shame. Anyway, thanks for watching.